Sure, thanks. And we have a flat organization in Sisu, so I'm not actually a CEO, I'm a partner, but thanks for the promotion. And and then my interest in the topic comes from the capital markets, where I do deals on the sort of selling and buying companies and issuing securities. And I have worked for these big global banks and domestic banks as well, so I know the banking side of things. What sort of drew me to the Bitcoin scene is the technology. I'm a small investor in Bitcoin myself, pathetically in the Coinbase system. I hear that's not the credible way to do it, but nevertheless. And I'm also author of Negotiation Handbook, which has sold quite well. So a bit of a plug here, Negotiation Power. And this deals with the micro end of negotiation, and which I think is pretty close to the heart of the Austrian economies. But I have interest in both practical negotiations, transactions, and as well as the macro.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sami. Apparently, it looks like my sound wasn't working in the beginning. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just do the intro briefly again. So yeah, this is the first ever English broadcast of Konsensus, Monday Night Konsensus, and my name is Niko. I'm the chairman of Finnish Cryptocurrency Association, and yes, Sami, you probably heard already what his background, and why don't we jump straight into Max? You can do a better job introducing yourself. Go ahead.
No, you did a great job. Thank you, Niko, very much. So I'm Max. I do not come from Finland as those other two guys. I'm from Germany. I live in the southern part of Germany. And my background is mainly in finance and in project finance and corporate finance. As Niko said, I work at Deutsche Bank. I'm doing my bachelor's degree there. It's a unique system in Germany where you study half the time at university, and the other half of the year I work at Deutsche Bank in the different departments. And there I focus on the financing of commercial clients and business clients mainly, and focusing here on structuring the debt finance and how to help those businesses. But that's not the only reason, or not the only company that I'm working with. I also work with my family in a company that we founded back in 2011 called Apparitium, which is a company where we help businesses and individuals to reach their financing goals. And we focus here on real estate and renewable energies and some mergers and acquisitions, that kind of stuff. And that's why I mainly got started in Bitcoin, because it was I was always versed in finance, and that's always a topic that has been of huge interest to me. And then I decided to write for a paper for my bachelor's thesis, a paper on how to finance a photovoltaic power plant with a token sale. This was back in October 2017. I initially got into Bitcoin back in 2016, early. And then this paper that we published in October 2017, I started a open source organization called NX Solar, which Niko is one of the best members that we have. He's a phenomenal guy to work with. And what we do is we finance a photovoltaic power plant for a community with a token sale. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Then on the economic side, I delve myself as a researcher, and I like to do my research, and I like to focus my studies on economics. And here I like to get a broad understanding, and I did study the mainstream economics, that's Keynesianism and monetarism and all the good stuff we're going to talk about today. But then for me, I realized that the Austrian school of economics is a school of thought that is really interesting to me. And this is where I base most of my argumentation, simply because I think it's the best argumentation. So when it seems that I focus too much on the Austrian side, just remember it's just one argumentation that I like, and there are many other points of view that we can talk about.
Great, thank you guys, and welcome to the show. And I'm so glad that you are here, and I'm really excited to start to talk about these topics. Before we get into it, let me do the disclaimer again. So this is for everybody who's watching. This is not financial or otherwise advice of any kind. Just three guys talking about opinions about money, future, all these good things. So do your own research, and maybe you can learn something. Maybe you disagree with us, or you have something to add. please do so in the chat. Let me go through quickly our panel here. So first we're going to open with some basic questions about fiat and crypto in general, and then we're going to move into economics, micro and macro, and how cryptocurrencies and fiat go into play in those. And finally, we'll move into the open section when we will, you already sent some questions, some of you, really good ones. And we're going to take some questions from the chat. And that's pretty much it. And let's see how many topics we can touch. We have a long list of possible questions here, and we're not going to be able to go through everything. So any audience participation is warmly welcomed. And yeah, like Max said, I'm also part of the NX Solar, so that's something interesting to know. We're working on the same project, and We Economy as well. Max is on that project as well. And yeah, and we all are, to some extent, non-zero sum investors in cryptocurrencies, so also something to keep in mind while we talk about these topics. Okay, without further ado, let's get to it. First, I would like to ask Sami if you could briefly describe us your presentation about digital euro, because I think that's kind of a good intro to the topic, and we can build it from there. Go ahead, Sami.
Thanks. So this was about 2 weeks. I had an audience on the University of Helsinki, and the other presenters were Nordea, chief economist, and then the Bank of Finland, and then an Italian professor, and it was on the ECB after the crisis. And of course, many people ask, well, has the crisis really passed? And of course, it hasn't. And so the topic was to discuss how do you prepare for the next eventual downturn, which will happen, and of course, probably sooner than most people think. And the euro is very vulnerable for the next downturn because, of course, the previous downturn in 2008, it already almost collapsed. So we need to fix it, and the official fix is not good enough. So they're trying to do a banking union, which is basically an insurance model, and that will fail. So my solution was to do what the good guys are doing on the cryptocurrency scene and decentralize euro. So basically, I'm a big believer in decentralization, and I like Nicholas Taleb and his book on anti-fragility. So euro is extremely fragile system, and you need to make it anti-fragile. And the way to do that is with 2 tools: decentralization, and then hopefully also with blockchain technology. And of course, some of you guys who are more invested in the Bitcoin scene think that's a waste of energy. You should just go from fiat to Bitcoin directly or crypto. But I think you can save the fiat by making it modern. And basically my presentation was, how do you do that? And it's not easy because it's massive. The euro system is 22,000 billion euros, and that's about 70 times the size of all cryptocurrencies put together. Of course, 2 weeks ago it was only 300 billion. Now it's back in back to closer to 400 billion. So this thing goes up and down. But it's a massive system, and a lot of people are using it. 400 million people are using it, massively more than Bitcoin. So you can't do it wrong. And so the decentralization is also has to be done carefully. Not to go in too much in detail, my sort of a rough solution is that you convert all the existing euros using a basket system similar to IMF SDR, which is a basket currency. And then you put the 20 local Bitcoin-like euro systems on each euro country to manage the national euros. And then you create a sum of those on the central level, which is managed by the ECB. And you could invite various outsiders to run full nodes, if you will, to audit the system. But by design, this would be a semi-centralized system where the issuance would mostly happen at the commercial bank level, and the mining of the individual people would be limited to the auditing function in my model. Of course, we don't need to do this now. Nobody will do this now. So we're talking about 5 years from now future. But I think we need to do this thinking if we want to save the fiat system. Of course, if you don't want to save the fiat system, you do nothing and let it collapse. And I can see Max leaning on that solution already.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sami. That's really interesting. I'm really curious to see if Max, do you think euro fiat can be saved by decentralization? Is it worth saving? What do you think?
So the first question, is it going to be able to be saved? I don't think so. But the point you bring up, Sam, is really interesting with decentralization. I agree, decentralization in money is a really, really, really important part, and especially the anti-fragility of an open and flat system is really, really powerful and really strong. We see it with Bitcoin. You cannot bring the system down. It's running 24/7. It has like an uptime of 99.97%. It's super anti-fragile, and I think that's mainly because of the decentralization. Now, and especially when we talk about decentralization in money, what we talk about is not just the decentralization of running a full node, but the decentralization of power and control, and especially the power to print new money. And if we decentralize this power to print more new money, then yes, this will be better than if the power to print new money would be centralized in one system. And as Sami said, most of the printing of the money happens on the retail bank level anyway. So there is a lot of decentralization in the printing of money, at least to a certain degree. Now, what is also interesting is then that you said that you wanted to decentralize the money production. Even if it is decentralized, if there is no limit on the money production, then the money producers will print endless money, of course, because it's almost free for them and it's money, so they can use it. So if you do not have harsh caps on the increase of the money supply, then I do not think that any degree of centralization can stop the printing of money and the fraudulent printing of money, which, if you follow the Austrian theory of the business cycle, is the main cause for the boom and bust that we have, printing of new money.
Can I challenge that?
Please, yes.
Most what you said, but I think what the people fail to understand usually is that yes, the commercial banks can print new deposits at will. They have no reserve restrictions in the Euro system. You only need to have 1% of reserves. It's nothing, so it's clearly not the constraint. But why don't these banks print limitlessly the money? The reason is that they only issue new deposits which are the debt of the commercial bank. So they are liable for the full amount on the liability side. It's a way of funding their operations. And so it's not free, it's a debt to the company. So all these commercial banks own 70,500 billion euros of debt called deposits, and it's not free. And why they issue that, or why they have issued already that amount? They have on the other side of the balance sheet, on the asset side, a net present value positive investments to people like us on our mortgages or in companies. And credit committees, wise people in banks make these decisions to lend, and they don't approve the decisions to lend unless the asset side of the balance sheet is of higher net present value than the liability side of things. So you only increase the liabilities if you have a positive NPV projects to invest. Of course, some banks have bad control, so they create a project funding, which is bad, but nobody wants to get more liabilities. So if you don't have projects, you don't print. And that creates the deflationary cycle. When things go wrong, you lose all the projects and you stop printing, and then you kind of come to the Austrian school of deflationary cycle. But we can come back to that later.
Thanks.
Deposits
yes, go ahead.
are not deposits; are liabilities.
You touched a little bit of how fiat money is created and how what is the, like, you often hear this claim that the central banks can print money limitlessly and inflate limitlessly. I think you gave us explanation on that. Did you have a response, Max? Go ahead.
It is absolutely true that how you explained it, perfect. That the money is created mostly on the retail level and through debt. So once you put money into a bank account, it is no longer your money. You legally gave up all the claims to this money. What you have now is a claim to the debt on that money, or to get that amount of money back. But what you do every time you bring cash into a bank, or if you get your paycheck into your bank account, is you officially and legally give up the ownership over your money. And I just, to wrap your hand around this, nobody of us pretty much owns any money, because the real money species, the money species, is completely locked up and debt-based. And the money substitute, those are the dollar bills or the euro bills, and the euros in the bank account are the digital euro, the digital dollar, which we, by the way, have since 20 years. So yes, I agree. But it's also really important to keep that in mind.
I agree with that. Maybe one level on that. Yes, if you have a piece of euro and you go to Deutsche Bank or Nordea and put it on the account, yes, you gave up the ownership of this, but you own a kind of bond in the Nordea or Deutsche Bank. So you own the debt, and that's valuable. It's valuable.
But it is the money substitute and not the money species. And there's a big difference, especially if the money substitute is leveraged on top of the money species. So what I mean with that is, if we have, for example, let's use a gold as an example, because that's rather easy to conceptualize. So you have a gold coin, and you bring that into the bank account, and you tell the bank teller, hey, this is my gold coin, please take care of it. I don't want to do it myself. Someone is going to steal it out of my house, so please, you take care of it. Now, what of course the banks can do with the fractional reserve is that they say, okay, now we have one gold coin, but we're going to tell 99 other people that they can now have one gold coin as well. So in the bank world, there's only one coin, one gold coin, but 100 people have a claim on this gold coin. Now, in this special case, the gold coin is the money species. It's the real money, one gold coin. And then we have the money substitute, which is, in this case, a leveraged by the factor of 100 or 1%, which we have in the current system, is the leveraged or the leveraged debt, the obligation to receive this money species. So this claim is the money substitute. And when there's a leverage here, this is kind of a hidden inflation, which means that you actually create much, much, much more money in the system than was there before with the factor of 100.
I partially agree, but you could live in a world where you completely eliminate this, and you should. There's absolutely no reason why you should have a real money species or gold or anything like that. You could completely operate and own just securities in the world. Those securities would be the banned debt and called deposits, and or Bitcoin or any or shares or any other security. So I kind of disagree with the leverage effect, because the banks' deposits are not backed by the physical species. They are backed by the what the bank lends to outside, and those are equally valuable. So they are your mortgage or Nokia's debt or Apple's debt or whatever. It's a valuable claim on the other side of the balance sheet. And so it's kind of irrelevant whether you hold sort of the real money in the asset side of things, unless you have a bank run. Then of course you need to have access to that, and that happens.
Bank run is of course one other thing that you have with leveraged fractional reserve, absolutely. But what I was talking strictly about is the economic aspects of increasing the money supply. So it doesn't matter what the money is. If you increase the money supply, that has economic consequences, obviously. Explained in the Austrian business cycle theory. And it doesn't matter what the money species and the money substitute is. If you increase the money supply in whatever form, this is going to form misincentives.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, guys. Okay, let's move on to the next one, because we're touching it already. Like, seems like there's some kind of, we can all agree that there's some kind of a problem with the current system, right? So are cryptocurrencies solving a problem? What kind of a problem, and how can it be solved? And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe obvious solution is it's a hugely efficient payment system. So you bypass the the middleman. So basically, you move from one ownership account to another one. So that's I see the technological benefit is the biggest one. But then you have various other ways you can use it, and I see blockchain as a technology and secondarily as a money.
Good point. So what I see most importantly, what this system of free and voluntary and open currencies can actually accomplish is to absolutely abolish and diminish censorship and exclusion of anybody. Because in the Euro system or fiat system as we have it right now, it works okay. It works quite good for roughly 1.5 billion people on this planet. Because we 1.5 billion, we are the privileged few that have international banking accounts where we can do international money transactions and where we can purchase international stocks and equity and bonds and everything. We have an international capital market.
Max.
Yes. But we also have to consider, and this is really, really important for us, especially us living in Europe and the States, that most of the people do not have such a bank account. Most of the people do not have such financial opportunities. Roughly 4 billion people have either a highly censored or a highly restricted or a highly limited account that they can use maybe for local transactions, or they have a cash system where most of what they do is cash based. But there's also 1 billion people, and probably much more, that don't have a banking account whatsoever. Nothing. And I mean, those people are screwed. They are completely screwed. They cannot partake in this worldwide economy that we have it today. And this is economic warfare. I'm sorry, but this is literally what it is. Now, but on the other side, right now, pretty much everyone has the opportunity to get a smartphone. There are smartphones coming out for $1, $5. So many opportunities to get your hands on a cheap computer in whatever form. As soon as you have a computer and either a satellite dish or an internet connection, you are a bank. Not just a bank customer, you are a bank. You have the power that not even Goldman Sachs has, especially regarding payments. I mean, do a multi-signature address with a time-locked contract, and you can all of a sudden make a contract with 3 different people all around the globe, and you don't have to trust any of those. That is not possible with the euro. The euro is a completely trusted system, and therefore, if you break that trust, the central authority can censor you, and they can exclude you out of the system. So what this new currency, this new way of free and voluntary and open and peaceful money will bring is prosperity and economic freedom.
Okay, since we're talking about banking down-banked, before Sami, you can give your response. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit. I thought you said that the physical form of money won't be needed in the future. Could you elaborate on that? Because I think it ties in with banking down-banked. Go ahead, Sami.
Yeah, so the amount of physical cash, the bills and coins in the Eurozone is 1,150 billion euros. So just to give a perspective, the GDP of Finland is about 210 billion euros. So we're talking about 6 times the amount of the money, and it's to think of that, why you're still using pieces of paper and coins, and because the databases were developed, I don't know, God knows when, 40 years ago, and it's been able to store bits in the database for ages, and you could just digitalize, not even use blockchain, but just the plain digitalizing central database, this stuff. And the reason it hasn't been done, that it's a systematic risk. It's a lot of money. Even if you allow the 1,150 billion euros to move freely, that's a problem. You can see in Greece, they have still capital controls started in the July 2050. Yeah, you can withdraw money more than a few tens of euros per day. You can't transfer money out from Greece even in the deposits form. It's prohibited. So the system clearly can't take even a few tens of billions of flow from a country like Greece. And if you open up all this physical cash for movement, that's what would happen. You would have this flow. especially if you open a fully secure, non-defaultable central bank account. In the instance you get any kind of turmoil, people would move most of their money there, and that would of course be a massive bank run, instant digital bank run. That's the reason why we haven't digitalized the physical cash, not because it's hard. It's very easy. Mm-hmm. So it's to prevent bank runs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good points you bring up. A couple things. What is money in general? It is a medium of exchange. It is a good that I believe, that I trust. I trust in this good that I can in the future buy something else and consume this that I bought or invested and be productive with it. But that's really what it is. It's a medium of exchange. It's a good that I do not want to consume myself, but that I want to use in a exchange, in trade in the future, in the near future or far future. Now, what can this medium of exchange be? It can be anything. It can literally be anything. It can be physical, it can be a gold coin, it can be a stone, it can be a feather, it can be a whatever, but it could also be digital. I mean, the euro is a digital currency. The dollar is a digital currency. Every fiat currency is a digital currency. So at Deutsche Bank, we have a program that manages all the accounts and all the flows in the customer accounts. This piece of software was written in 1983. In 1983, Deutsche Bank switched all its accounts to be digital. And I mean, and by the way, we are still running the system, which is kind of scary. But just to show you, money can always be digital.
Just to give you context, I'm born in '83, so while back.
Well done, sir.
Go ahead,
perhaps
Sami,
to expand on that, it's an important point Max brings up. Money can be anything, and actually, there's a fantastic book by the previous governor of the Bank of England and Mr. Andrew King, and I believe he's Alchemy of Money, and there he actually suggests that money could be a wallet, a digital wallet, which contains any security. It can contain fiat money, it could contain Bitcoin, it can contain your house, it can contain Nokia shares, it can contain any kind of asset. And when you transact you can use the artificial intelligence or some other heuristic to calculate the liquidity and the price optimal point of what you should sell, and you transact with that combination. And then the other guy just receives the combination of that money, and either they accept what you offer, or their preferences communicate with your IE and say, well, you just exchange some other medium which is liquid and acceptable as a payment. And this could completely bypass currency, and I kind of like that, and I think that's another way to do this.
So when you say it's going to bypass currency, do you mean national currency or currency in general?
Yeah, I mean, he said that at least for start, a big part of that wallet would be fiat currencies, because most people would accept that as a payment, but not everybody would accept Nokia shares, for example, even if it's a liquid stock. And I would, no problems on that. But eventually, most people would at least with a discount, they would accept most securities as a payment, at least in the Western world. What you said previously, Max, that's very, very important. I mean, we are privileged ones. If you're in Venezuela or Argentina, then you screwed, and in the fiat is completely useless for you. And the Bitcoin is far superior, or Nokia shares for that matter. I mean, you should take any liquid Western security instead of your rotten fiat system.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. But then the interesting question is that once we've established that anything can be money, what makes a good money? And that's a tough question. And economists had no answer for that for hundreds and thousands of years. Eventually, we figured it out. Karl Menger.
Did it cut off?
Max, are you still there?
He was going to talk about Austrian theory, so
censorship hit. Okay, he's back.
Okay, I could hear you. I could hear you.
Okay, okay.
Talk about Austrian theory.
I was, yes.
Somebody was throttling your connection. All right, go ahead. Continue.
It's the central banks trying to censor us. Okay. So what makes a good money? It's the saleability. So saleableness is the ability of being sold right now for as much of a value as possible. So the slippage between the real value and the value that you can get when exchanging it, this slippage needs to be as minimum as possible, so that with each transactions you don't lose much money. Because let's assume you have, let's say, $10 or euros, but if you buy something with those $10 because nobody wants to have them, you only get something that is worth $9. Well, if you know that's 10% slippage, that's going to cost you a lot, especially with frequent transactions. So it makes sense to use that currency or that good, that medium of exchange, which is the most saleable. This means which is accepted by the most people, which right now is, of course, the euro, but also other parts like being able to transact it. And of course, Bitcoin is much better there than the euro, or being able to move it around. Gold coins are heavy. Gold coins are loud, so you cannot really sneak around with them. Bitcoin is much better in that, brain wallet, no? And then, of course, also the durability. So a banana is a bad medium of exchange, a bad currency, because if you don't touch it for a week, it's going to be bad. And so you would have to spend all the money you have before it gets bad, which, of course, it's what fiat system is.
Yeah. I think that we come back to transaction costs, basically Bitcoin and the blockchain technology. I see that's the technology to cut the middleman, so you can transact immediately from point to point, and you don't have to pay some fat guy in the middle to hold or store or trade your stuff. And that's why I would like to challenge the sort of the why you should be overexposed in your wallet, if you will, on the fiat. I mean. I personally, I view every bank deposit I have as an investment in that particular bank. Do I want to borrow Nordea 10,000 euros at zero cost? Perhaps not. But yes, but I am, because I need the liquidity. But then let's say beyond that point, I say, well, there's bonds, there's shares, there's Bitcoin, all kinds of investments, and then I create a risk position mix on that. And I think that should be the mindset people have. You whenever you make the decision to hold fiat in the bank deposit form, you are investing in a certain bank at a pretty lousy return.
Yes, and at high risk, because it's not banks go bust pretty regularly, and especially the last 100 years. So really, I mean, trusting a bank is a big step, and as you said, you do not get paid anything about that. But that is also interesting, because when we see when we take a equity-based money, so let's say gold and not a debt-based fiat money. So if we take that, money itself does not make more money. That is really important, because you have one gold coin, like on day one, it doesn't matter that after 100 days, you all of a sudden have 2 gold coins. No, of course not. Money does not make money. Good choices and good investments and being productive and helping the consumer, that makes you money. But money having itself is neutral.
Yeah,
but
kind
then,
of.
Again, because the fiat system is based on debt, it's mixing the money, which itself by definition doesn't make you more money, with a debt, which and a contract with further repayment, which by definition makes you more money. So I think that's also interesting, that we have a big discrepancy in the two systems that are fundamental. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right. But then you can get yield in the other form than interest. So you could have just own a commodity which goes up and down, and you take a bet whether it hopefully it goes up, and you invest in oil. And then if you invest in oil, you want it to go up, and even if you get no physical yield, you get the price appreciation, and that's your choice in your portfolio. So to some extent, the interest is not irrelevant, but it's just that you can have a zero coupon bond which pays zero interest, and you just only rely on the future principal repayment. But what I'm challenging, I mean, it's a kind of naive person who blames the money. I mean, you have in this world, in the Western world, you have a limitless investment possibilities and absolutely thousands of ways you can hedge against all kinds of economic cycles. And you should definitely not be over invested in fiat, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we can all
Absolutely,
agree on that. So interesting. To recap a little bit, Max, you seem to think that the banks need to be replaced. You said that anybody who has a smartphone and internet connection becomes a bank. So that's like underlying the personal responsibility. And Sami, correct me if I'm wrong. You seem to think we need to fix the banks, and we would still need the banks for something. Are cryptocurrencies putting banks out of business, or are the banks going to be evolving? And if then how? Why don't you go first, Sami?
Yeah, of course, this is a huge disruption, and I mean, you're a pretty stupid bank CEO if you don't have somebody thinking on the blockchains already. And of course, they are, because they have a massive resources to do this. And then you go, of course, people are, I think, mostly looking at as a technological solution, like I am, and only secondarily as a sort of a way to sort of kill the existing business, which people usually don't like to do. But smart guys will disrupt themselves, and then of course the future banks will be less capital intensive. They will be less trading focused, and they will use this technology, and they will adapt. And but then they will have a big place, because just you have that 70,500 billion of debt invested in the system, so you have to do something with that, and then it's that will stay there for a long time at least.
Good points. And Niko, I do not think that banks will be displaced completely, but I think that banking is drastically changing. Every action where we have a trusted third party in the financial system, we no longer need that. Period. That's truth. That's it. And no, that might sound scary, because if you work at a bank and you go through the list of the services that you provide, and you check or you line through the services that make you a trusted third party, I think that doesn't leave you with that much stuff to do. So anything with cash flow related, anything transaction based related, anything with foreign exchange, any buying and selling of securities, anything like that, banks are gone. Like, they've lost already. It's too late. However, that's not all that banking does, because what we still need is consulting and managing of finance. This did not change. Now we have a new currency, but how do we manage that currency in our own portfolios, for example? So that is something that I think where banking is really, really important. So to structure finance and to optimize it is still something that we need. Well, do we need a person really doing that, a human being? No, I think much of that can be automated, especially what you see with investments, with robo-advisory and all that kind of stuff that is coming, that is here. So banks are not fighting just one battle; they are fighting many battles. And yeah, so I'm not confident, to be honest. But I still think that banking is a vital part of any economy, and that it will still play a vital part in this new economy. Well, the economists or the financiers now just have to be a bit more IT savvy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, you can take a perspective of USA versus Europe. And I mean, in the USA, the funding is 2/3 capital markets driven, meaning the investors invest via bonds in the companies, and they invest directly in the shares. And in the Europe, it's about the reverse. So you have only 1/3 of the funding is capital market sourced and 2/3 bank sourced. So the disruption will be much bigger in Europe, because you still have to catch up of that 1/3 compared to USA. I would add to your list of consulting the wealth management. So that's a huge growth industry, because people still want to have a trusted party to hold their funds, and it's not only advice, but somebody. For example, me, I'm very comfortable owning Bitcoin through Coinbase. You say it's useless, you want to own it directly, but I want to have that third party to to stand between me and the evil market.
It's a very good point, and yeah, I think we all agree that banks to some extent will continue. The ones that evolve will keep having business. What kind of business do you guys think the banks are mainly going to be? Like Sami touched up on custodian service. I think that's going to be a big part. Like you said, I think most people still won't want to take personal responsibility of their funds. I don't think people are ready for that. I'm not sure if people will ever be ready for that. So for sure, I think custodial services will be the obvious thing. And of course, then there's all kinds of funding, loans, stuff like that. What do you guys think? Max, you go first.
Custodial services are a really, really interesting topic. And I would even go so far to say if in a couple years' time, we still have custodial accounts in Bitcoin, then we have failed. Bitcoin was made, its sole purpose to destroy middlemen and to destroy custodians. If we go back to that, then it's useless. Then it's a slow database. That's all it is. We can do custodial services not on a blockchain, but on a centralized database, much, much more efficient. I mean, look at what PayPal is doing. That's a custodial service on the internet. That's a digital currency. It's not its own currency, but it's a digital token representing the existing currency that is managed in a centralized database. Works perfectly fine as a centralized database. Mm-hmm. And what I think, especially with custodians, is that this is not that this is a problem mainly of user design and user interface. And if we make it easy for a user to be, your own bank, to own your money, to own the private keys, then absolutely this can be done. I mean, look at what the Ledger is doing. The Ledger Nano S or the Trezor or the OpenDime or whatever hardware wallet that you can think of. It's really, really easy to use those. It's a USB stick that you plug in. That's all you do. Is it perfect yet? No, it can still be easier. Absolutely, yes, and it will be easier, but it is possible. And what the type of security that you get with a hardware wallet is astonishing. And the convenience that you have is still really high. So will we have custodial services? Yes, for some transactions. I hope it's not going to be much. And I think that once we improve the user interface, and once especially education is much more advanced, and that people actually know what the difference between the private and the public key is, like once we've reached that kind of understanding, then we're going to be extremely safe. But of course, or what I would rather say is that the best way to make something as user friendly is to put a bunch of stuff behind the scenes. And it would be ideal that if the users don't even know which currency they're using, and if they don't know the difference between a currency that they own themselves and the currency that is given out by a custodian.
Yep. You make good points. Then I would like to point on your good friend, which is the regulation, the government, and of course they will protect the current system, and not for only evil reasons. There's of course the sort of a reversibility of fraudulent transactions, and let's say your old mother gets screwed by fraud, and you would like the system to be able to reverse the money so you don't lose your inheritance. And so to some extent that's a fair game in the system. You need to have if you don't, it's just a peer-to-peer network where everybody's for themselves, then that will be open to fraud.
Really good point that you bring up, Sami, with the reversibility of transactions. So I have a question of you, and then you can keep going. Where do you see a line between reversing a transaction for fraudulent reasons and censoring a transaction because of your own political reasons? Because it's a really, really, really thin line. And technically, it's the same thing. You either stop a transaction from happening, or you reverse a transaction that already happened. That's censorship.
Sure. Yeah, and of course, in the Mad Max world, everybody's up to themselves, and if bad things happen, then that's your own problem. Even if you get just the market on the street for your private keys, and that's your problem. You should hire an army to protect you. So I'm exaggerating. So, but I completely agree with your point. I mean, of course, in the sort of nice society, non-democratic society, of course, the dictators will take your money and laugh at you, and then that's stuff, and you don't want that. So but I hope the sort of Western democracy and all this soft stuff will at least protect us from that scenario. And so, of course, that may be a little bit naive to trust your friendly regulator to not to be evil, but it's possible. It's possible.
A lot of things are possible. Yeah. By the way, when you made that Mad Max remark, I flashed the meme on the streams. Okay. I hope people appreciate the humor of that.
You need to show the Negan meme as well. So.
Yeah, they are both here right now. I'll show it again in case somebody missed it.
So when the zombie apocalypse comes, I'm still be collecting your 50% of tax, and perhaps we actually could make a point about that.
I'm just going to show this.
But that's another point. I mean, tax. I mean, I am one of these sort of soft guys who kind of like moderate taxes. I hate big government. I hate evil, extractive governments who take your money and spend it for their own pet value destructive projects, including paying themselves. But you have a nice, good governments who sort of are inclusive and care about your children and their education and your pensions and your social care. So, like Finland, which is the happiest nation in the world. So you can have that sort of a nice, soft socialist type of society in moderation. And the Bitcoin is the enemy of that. So, or cryptocurrency. If you, who's gonna ever pay any tax if you can bypass it? Only the moral people, perhaps I would pay, but I'm not sure about you two guys. So it's a story.
That's actually that's a fantastic segue to the next question here. Will central banks want to use, or banks in general want to use blockchain technology, and if so, for what? And since you brought in, we all brought up on the topic on taxation, which is also always a hot topic. To me, it seems obvious that the government would want to exercise the power of blockchain to collect taxes in a one-way, immutable way, that they could roll back their transactions while retaining all the information of all the tax subjects. So what do you guys think? Will central banks implement blockchain technology? Will it work? Sami, do you want to go first?
Yeah, and let me quote the guy, Mr. Walsh, who almost became the chairman of Fed. He was quoted in the Wall Street Journal last week. Happy news for everybody. Mr. Walsh would have appointed a team to think about Fed creating a FedCoin, where it would bring legal activities into a digital coin. Not that it would supplant and replace cash, but it would be a pretty effective way when the next crisis happens for us to maybe conduct monetary policy. So your friendly central bank wants to use the FedCoin to save you from the next downturn. I see you guys nodding already. This is a good idea. But seriously, guys, this is the
sounds good.
Guy who almost became the Fed chairman, sort of saying they're gonna create a blockchain-based central money. So you can believe it's been already thought of. And of course, the easy way to do that is because you have currently the central bank money in the Eurozone. For example, this 2,300 euros of central bank deposits, which is held by the commercial banks in the Bank of Finland and the Bundesbank and the likes. That's a database. So it's a database saying they own this money from or have the deposits in central banks. And what Fed is here saying, instead of having database, you can use cryptocurrency technology, blockchain. So Bank of Finland, the Nordea owns via blockchain a ECB coin, and that's the central money. And they can do the audited distributed ledger transactions on that, and bypass the middleman, which in this case is the national central bank. So it's being planned, and so whether you want it or not, it's going to happen at some point, I believe.
Many
good reasons.
just on taxation briefly, because we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about as well. So I'm a voluntarist. I am of the strong opinion that each and every single transaction or interaction that we humans do should be 100% voluntary or not at all. As soon as there is violence involved or the threat of violence, which is coercion, this interaction is always wrong and immoral and should not be done.
Think about the children.
But as you say, I'm not per se, or well, okay, I am per se against taxation, but I'm not per se against the socialist system and the social insurance system that we have. The only problem that I have is that it is funded by stolen money. It is funded by taxes, and that is fundamentally wrong. However, what I would also say that if you, Sami, want to have such an insurance, well, then pay for it. But as soon as you do this transaction voluntarily, it is no longer taxation. It's a voluntary payment for example, an insurance. So taxation is by definition always forceful violence. And as soon as you take away this forceful violence and tell everyone, hey, if you want to have this service, buy it, pay for it, use it, then it's no longer taxation. So those are my 2 cents on taxation.
Yeah, I agree mostly. Sami, would you give a quick remarks on that, and then we can move on with the next topic?
Yeah, I've heard this taxation, this theft argument a couple of times, but I think that you make a great point about the insurance. But I think the problem with the insurance, people are stupid in analyzing the risks they face. So people under-invest. So you need the outside party to insurance them for them, and then your friendly government comes to help you, the stupid people who don't use insurance. So
I agree, but I also say that it is your right to be stupid. And if I stop you from being stupid, then I harm you, and then I'm doing something wrong. If you want to be stupid, be stupid. If you want to not be insured and take the risk, do it. It's your choice. I'm not going to make it for you.
Yeah, but some people don't have the mental capabilities to make those sort of rational decisions. They just spend everything, and they maybe we come back on that the deflation point. But they spend. They don't save. They don't make any investments in the either on insurance or capital expenditures. And that's sad.
Absolutely, and I think that's stupid. But it's their choice.
Yeah, but then if they're stupid in the massive quantities, you need the responsible party, which is sadly the government. And then the point about that it's you can't force your sort of power construction to innocent third parties. And I'm all for people to have the absolute freedom to move. So if you don't like one government system, it's absolutely essential you are allowed to change countries and have your life in a country which has your preferences, and that's actually the way to go. Maybe eventually we'll have a competition between countries where the people who think like you and can live in a peace. I think we have this lady called Ayn Rand who wrote this book about people living the societies to sort of to the weak and have their own utopian society.
Thanks, guys. Really good.
A bit naive, but,
sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Finish your sentence.
Yeah, and then you can have this kind of elysiums or Chinese billionaires living in the luxury boats or islands. But then I'm not sure I want to be sort of a lower rank member of that society either. I'd rather be in Finland. Yeah,
that's fair. That's totally fair, and really, really amazing points, guys. Really enjoying this conversation. I'll offer a quick anecdote on the insurance. I read somewhere that buying an insurance is betting something awful happens to you. So that's interesting. So you're basically shorting your own life. So that's kind of changed my perception of insurances.
Yeah, but it's true. It's true, especially health insurance and
right.
It's especially.
But it's more like a funny anecdote. It's not such a serious thing. No, anyway, moving on. A couple more things, like technical things about cryptocurrencies. There's been a lot of talk about energy efficiency, especially when it comes to proof of work, which is the consensus algorithm of Bitcoin. Is it wasteful in terms of energy consumption? If you think so, what would be the alternative if we're talking about digital cryptographic euro, or we're talking about Bitcoin? There's a couple options I've listed here: proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, and Byzantine fault tolerant delegated proof of stake. And how do you guys feel about these different technologies? Can they be useful? And while you're at it, take a stab at 51% attacks. Max, why didn't you go first?
Okay, so really good points. The energy problem in Bitcoin is one of the most most publicly talked problems, and I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions there are in Bitcoin. Because as a matter of fact, Bitcoin is by far, the most efficient currency that we have ever had, by a landslide, by like a factor of 1,000. It's not even close. Because I mean, the only problem with Bitcoin is that we know exactly how much electricity is produced, because we know exactly how many hashes, or we don't know exactly, but we can calculate roughly how many hashes have already been done by the current difficulty and accumulated difficulty in the blockchain. So we can calculate how much energy has been wasted. This calculation is not as easily possible in other currency systems. But if you think about it, just imagine how much electricity alone, and I'm just talking about electricity, is being wasted by the euro system. Just imagine every single light bulb that is in every single bank, every single computer that is running, every single server that is running. It's immense. It's immense. And that is only electricity costs. You also have, of course, a bunch of human costs, human capital. Many people work in the fiat system. And you also have capital costs and all that allocated together. It's a lot of money. Now, compared to gold, it is really expensive to mine a piece of gold. You actually have to put in a lot of costs, and it's not just the refinement, but it's also the extraction and the exploration of the gold. So there's many different steps and many thousands and millions of people involved to keeping those currency systems running. With Bitcoin, it's only the blockchain. That's it. That's it. And this blockchain, by the way, over the last 9 years, has reached such a extreme, or has increased its efficiency drastically. If you compare it back in 2009, we had mining on your laptop, on your CPU. This means you used the electricity of your laptop to produce a couple of thousand hashes. That was back then really cool, but because it was the only alternative. But over time, technology advanced, and we got so much more efficient. First, then we started mining on graphic cards, which is, I think, by a factor of 10 or 100 more efficient than CPUs. Don't quote me on those numbers. And then, of course, the what are the third generation, the FCIS chips, I think. But those were only around for a couple of weeks or months. And then we had the A6 chips, where we're still right now. And now we are at like terahashes per second. And this, compared to the couple thousand hashes per second that we had in 2009, is a drastic increase in efficiency. So the Bitcoin system got much more efficient over the time because people are incentivized to do research and to improve the technology to do it more efficiently and more cheaper. And then to briefly talk just one sentence about the 51% attack, also really big misconception. Number one, it has never happened once. It's a theoretical problem only. And even a theoretical problem is not a big problem at all. So what is a 51% attack? This means that you have enough computing power to do roughly half the hashes in the entire system. So you have roughly 51% of a chance to get the right to build the next block. And once you have that, mathematics and fork get into it, you could disturb the system. But how could you disturb the system? You could not steal any money. You could not reverse any, or you could not spend money out of a transaction, out of an address that has not been used before. And you cannot do a transaction without you being the owner of it. The only thing that you can do is double spend. But what is double spending? Double spending is I go to Niko and say, hey, I would like to have a coffee. I send him a transaction of 1 Bitcoin. get the coffee, run out of the shop. As soon as I'm out of the shop, I meet Sami, and I'm like, hey, Sami, I'd like to have your headphones. Give them to me for a Bitcoin. And I give you these.
Yeah, 1 Bitcoin, yeah. Deal.
Yeah, deal. But then here, the interesting part is that I use the same Bitcoin that I promised Niko. I give Sami the same Bitcoin. Now, what did I get?
It's kind of expensive, though.
Yeah. But so what did I get after this? I got the coffee of Niko for free. Okay, so what were my costs to do that? Running 51% of the Bitcoin hardware? What? You know how expensive that is for even a second? You're like, it's incredibly, incredibly, incredibly expensive. And you do not only have to do it for 1 second, you have to do it forever. You cannot stop. As soon as you stop, you lose. So you have to pretty much own like all the computers in the world and keep them running all the time. And the only thing you get is free coffee. Now, what are the incentives to do that? Because especially when you play by the rules, you get compensated quite handsomely with new Bitcoin. And if you have half the hashing power, you get like 6 Bitcoin, like right now, 6 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. 6 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. So you could either play by the rules, be nice, get 6 Bitcoins every 10 minutes, or you could get a free coffee and steal from Niko and piss off the entire system. And keep that attack running 24/7 forever with the most sophisticated hackers hunting you and trying to stop you. I'm sorry, a 51% attack is impossible.
That's a really good summation.
Great.
And Sami, just quickly before you jump in, I just shared a screen of the Bitcoin uptime since its conception, and it is 99.99 something percentage. So that's pretty impressive to me. Sorry, Sami, go ahead and chime in.
Great points, Max. And I'm on the weak ground here. I'm not sort of a tech expert. So I have to agree with pretty much everything you say. The reason I would challenge the proof of work is that if we now convert the euro system, which is 70 times bigger system than all the virtual currencies together, you don't want to have a 70 times the energy use of the proof of work if you can find a better way to validate the system. Now in the fiat system by default, I think you are a little bit having to move in the trust mode, and then of course you have a much sort of energy efficient trust modes to validate the system, and proof of stake or delegated proof of stake or even proof of authority. Your friendly Fed, ECB is a nice authority, right? And as such, if you can cut to fraction of your energy use, then that's of course a good thing. But then we are moving a little bit, and you could still have the outsiders owning the full nodes and validating the system, and they get rewarded with the new money for their work as the sort of the outsiders who don't trust the system. So I'm sort of coming from that angle. I think Bitcoin in itself might well find the economies to run forever, but then if you go to the fiat, then that's a completely new ball game.
Yeah, good points. And just one or two sentences about the other consensus algorithms. So number one, again, Bitcoin is not the first digital currency. So the first private digital currency was made in 1982. It failed. And all other currencies after that have failed miserably as well. Thousands of them. And the thing is, it's hard. It's a hard problem. It's not easy. Byzantine fault-tolerant systems are not easy. And especially when money is at stake and when people are incentivized to steal it from you. And now to claim that you have a good consensus algorithm is a high claim. And it's so we have a mathematical proof that Bitcoin's consensus algorithm works. And we have 9 years of history of proof that it works. And what is the market cap right now? Like 200 million, billion? What is it? So, billion, yeah. So we know that the system is secure for $200 billion because nobody has stolen them yet. That's all we can say. Now, what can we say from all those other consensus algorithm? They might work on paper, yes. Do they really work in the real world where incentives are at play, where human actors are at play all over the world, and everyone can hack your system 24/7? So I'm always a bit skeptical about new consensus algorithm. Definitely, we need the research, and there's much more cool space to explore here. Absolutely, but it's a hard problem, and especially systems like the Tangle, IOTA, or other hash graphs. Interesting. It's not new. It's been there before Bitcoin, as far as I know, and it's not as secure. It's not as censorship resistant, and yeah. But look, those are my 2 cents on other consensus algorithms.
That's cool. Sami, do you have anything on those other consensus algorithms? What will go well with the cryptographically proven or mined euro, for example?
Yeah, but then I would come to my point that I think fiat in the blockchain form is 5 years from now. So I believe in 5 years we'll have a much more goals in the consensus. So I think we haven't found the final truth in Bitcoin's structure.
I agree with that. Yeah, the whole technology and whole the scene is quite new, quite fresh. We will have tons of problems to solve, and we'll talk. You guys talked briefly about the Byzantine generals problem. I have shared a picture here on the stream of what that basically means. So the idea is like, Max mentioned that from the longest time people have been trying to solve this hard problem, and this is from Byzantine times. There's like this siege of a castle, and there's a bunch of generals who either they will fail the attack or they will succeed in the attack based on the communication. So they need to be able to trust that their message between these many generals will be received, and there's no bad actors in between that can give the wrong message. Because if even one of the generals are acting maliciously and not doing the attack while the others are going to do it, the siege is going to fail, and there's going to be a lot of casualties. So this is what the Byzantine generals' problem is, and what these consensus algorithms are all about solving. And I would say that it hasn't been fully solved yet, just due to the fact that it's not up to scale. It's nowhere near, like we mentioned many times, it's nowhere near the scale of the actual monetary system, not even the gold system. Like we're talking about 300 billion market cap. Let's see, actually. I think I have it here. 434 billion market cap at the moment. Still quite insignificant compared to basically any other asset class. So yeah,
we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. It's early days. It could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. It could be 2 years. Who knows? Anyway, one more question before we hit the mainstream. What needs to happen? What makes cryptographic assets a reality for everyday people, like normal people? Why on earth would you go cryptocurrency way instead of fiat way? What needs to happen? What's the key? Sami, would you go first?
Well, first people need to sort of take the technology seriously, and people are doing that. I think even last year people were sort of just saying, well, this is a sort of some techie toy, and the sort of the. But then because the technology is such a beautiful radical innovation, and just once you get other solutions, I mean, any kind of securities can basically be put. Smart contracts can be put on the blockchain form. Once the sort of real companies start doing blockchains-based transactions and securities, then people start to accept and trust the system, and they will start cutting the middleman, and then after that it snowballs. Then everything can go to a blockchain form. I think that's the biggest jump we need to make. Then we need to do something with the tax and regulation. So somehow, I'm sad to say, the system has to incorporate the taxation and regulation in it, and then that's very hard, because by inherently the blockchain is a peer-to-peer technology, and it doesn't invite themselves to the taxman or the government or regulator. And but we need that in some form, in my opinion, and it will be there because these people are looking at it. They don't want to lose out on the tax or the regulation.
What do you think, Max? Do we need regulators to tell us how to take care of our lives? I think I know the answer. You go ahead and chime in.
Well, as people might know, I'm not a big fan of governments and not a big fan of forceful regulation because, again, I think every transaction should be voluntary. And by definition, if you tell people not to do something, this is involuntary. So as long as you don't hurt anyone, you can do it. It's that easy, at least in my philosophy. So do we need regulation? I don't think so. I think it's Bitcoin's biggest strength to have no regulation or no outside forceful regulation, but only inside opt-in voluntary regulation. There is regulation in cryptocurrency. There is regulation in Bitcoin. It's called consensus. There are many, many laws and rules and regulations in Bitcoin. Yes, it's called a standard. But you don't have to use it if you don't like it. If you do like it, and if you do agree with those rules, I'll use it. If you don't, well, don't use it. So do we need forceful regulation in cryptos? Absolutely not. Do we need regulation in cryptos? Yes, we already have them. They're voluntary. Now, what do people, or what is still missing until we have mass adoption? That's a really, really good question. And I don't have the answer, but I think an interesting food for thought is that they just need to try it. I think that's it. Once you've made your first Bitcoin transaction, you get it. And you don't go back. And then for individuals, when does it reach mass adoption? Well, for many people, it already did hit. For me as well. I use Bitcoin as my main currency since over a year now. Not over, almost a year, roughly a year. For 95% of my transactions. For me, the euro is almost non-existable. I only use Bitcoin. That's my currency. That's my money. Mass adoption is here for me. For me. Not for everyone, no. But it's possible. It's been possible since 2011. So what do we need to do? Education and giving people a phone wallet and send them a few Satoshis. And that's it.
So yeah, that's really amazing points, both of you guys. I really like that. I do agree with both of you in the sense that we do need some kind of regulation. Like you said, Max, standardization and consensus is already there to do that. Forceful regulation, I'm not a big fan of that. I think it should be, those protocols should remain voluntary for everybody to use. But I will agree that for true mainstream to happen, people want somebody to say it's okay, you can use it. It's safe. Use this solution and you can be safe. And once we have that, I think we're going to hit a whole other, because like you said, it's not that hard, but I would say it's like 1995 internet hard-ish. For those who use it frequently, like I was using at that time, it wasn't that hard, but for a lot of people, it was almost impossible. So I think it's the same. Like we need a very user-friendly user interface that is in every way better than the current system for true mainstream adaptation to happen. That's my thought on it.
Then I would add the transaction cost reduction, which is of course already happening. So you have a massive reduction on the spread and the commission. So I think that will of course fuel it.
Right, of course, and once the actual mainstream adaptation starts, I do believe that volatility will decrease, of course, while the volumes go up. So then that will become much more stable store of value, at least in my opinion.
I cannot challenge that, of course.
Yeah, of course.
In my world, Bitcoin is like a share. So it goes up and down wildly because what does it have inside it? Nothing. It's basically a pure claim on ownership. And that's hugely valuable claim on ownership. And people are willing to pay massive amounts of money for that ownership. But it has nothing inside it. It has no liabilities, no assets. Just pure claim on ownership on a virtual asset. And virtue, such a thing moves in unpredictable ways. So I don't think you can get rid of the volatility.
So, but what is the intrinsic value of the fiat system?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. But it's also like I explained, it's covered by those assets. So in a sense, in a good fiat system, the assets, the liabilities, i.e. the deposits, are covered by at least equal side on the asset side. perhaps a little bit more on the NPV. Of course, in a bad fiat system, those are also volatile, so that creates the volatility and the liabilities. But inherently, it's a covered system, and Bitcoin is also a covered system, but it's covered by 2 zeros. If you take my sort of analogy here, so zero on liability and zero on asset, pure ownership.
But you're saying money has, or the fiat money has a value, or it has an intrinsic value because it is used in other places. It is used in the debt contract.
Yeah, the liability on the commercial banks is matched by the assets on that bank, so it's covered.
Well, but that's like if I'm saying, okay, I have here a piece of tissue, and I give that to you, and the only intrinsic value of this piece of tissue that that this piece of tissue represents another piece of tissue. I mean, that is basically your argument. The value in money is the value that is used in, or that is the value that is created by using the money in another place.
No, let's say the Deutsche Bank's liabilities, you have the deposits of several hundreds of billions of euros. But on the asset side of Deutsche Bank, you have a massive contracts which are at least as valuable on the NPV basis as the liabilities. So it's covered. And like I explained in the beginning, you don't increase your liabilities as a bank unless you have you put something at least as valuable on the asset side. So that's my fundamental.
But again, that's a circular argument. That's like saying, well, money has value because it has value. Money has a value because there's value in money on the asset side.
No, but if you think of a bond, if you invest in a company bond, that you would argue that's an asset for you, and you would argue it's a liability for the company who issues it. But you would be stupid to invest in that bond if the company doesn't have at least that valuable on the asset side of things. And of course they do, because otherwise they couldn't issue the bond. The bank is exactly like that. The bank deposit is exactly like that bond, and the banks do use bonds to fund themselves. Deposits are just the alternative way to fund the banks. That's the biggest misconception people have. They don't realize the deposits are banks' debt. It's like their debt funding program. They can extend, but they only extend this zero duration debt if they get positive NPV products to use it on the asset side of things.
Okay, good points. And I get what you're saying, but I don't think that that's the main value of money. As I said, I think the value of money is the saleability of the good itself, of the medium of exchange, to use it in future consumption or production, or to use it in future exchange. And I would argue that the value of money, regardless of what money it is, gold, Bitcoin, fiat, doesn't matter, it comes from that point and only from that point. And everything else doesn't really matter. Same, for example, with gold. One might argue that gold has intrinsic value because it's used in jewelry. Well, no, that's not the intrinsic value of gold. It's not.
Yes. No, of course, and prices vary. So, for example, if you have and that's the whole problem with the Eurozone. I mean, if you have alpha banks deposits in Greece, I mean, they are far inferior to even Deutsche Bank or certainly of Nordea. So, but the system treats that they have exactly the same value and same transferability, and as, by the way, a transferability to the physical euros. And for the banks themselves, they can transfer those other banks' liabilities to central bank debt, and that's the huge problem. You can't use one-to-one pricing in such a diverse asset base, and that's why I want to decentralize the system so that even the alpha banks' debt would have a different price to Nordea, and certainly the Greece euro should have a different price to Finnish euro and German euro. And then you sort of bring this together with this basket currency of creating the sort of international euro, which is the weighted sum of those 20 local digital blockchain euros. And that's what I try to explain to people would be my preferred solution at this point.
Thanks for your input, guys. I feel like we're moving into the economic theory part of the show, which is the latter part before the free question hour, which looks like we have quite a few questions in the chat already. Hold on tight. We're gonna get to those at the end of the show.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for asking.
And before moving on, I would like to share another anecdote. We were talking about paper money and we're talking about the future value of money. And there was this funny debate of which will be more valuable within 10 years, a dollar bill, a US dollar bill, or a square of toilet paper. And after a heated debate, we arrived to the conclusion that it must be the dollar bill because it can be washed and used again. So, not to not to endorse money laundering, but all right, yeah. Sorry about that, guys. I had to.
Oh God.
Okay, so let me ask you guys, and Max can go first this time. Austrian economic theory is widely supported, and Keynesian theory and similar are almost shunned in the Bitcoin community. What do you think that is?
Oh, that is a really, really good question. And I think it's mainly because Bitcoin is a libertarian's wet dream. It really is. If you study the Austrian school, and if you follow, or if you understand the Austrian theory of money and the theory of value and purchasing power of money, then you understand that Bitcoin is almost perfect. It is almost perfect in that regard. It is a line by line adaptation of the perfect libertarian free society money that you could think of. And this is complete speculation, but I am 100% sure that Satoshi Nakamoto was at least studying under the Mises Institute, and he probably was there and talking with the professors and everything countless times beforehand. I'm quite sure, because it is perfect in that regard. Now, why are so many libertarian-minded and Austrian economist-minded people in there? Well, because I think they realized it soon. And early on, there were two main groups in Bitcoin: the nerds that were writing the code, and the libertarians that provided the philosophy. And because Bitcoin is libertarian code, it works together perfectly. So I think libertarians just had the head start. They realized, hey, this is a real currency. This is not just magic internet money that has no value. This is money. This has value. I'm going to use it. And I think the first people that saw that are the Austrian economists, mainly because they have decades, or not kind of decades. They have a couple years of experience with that stuff, and many, many great books written. For example, if you read the phenomenal book, and it's only, I think, 180 pages, so you have to read it, it's a must. It's called What Has Government Done to Our Money by Marianne Rothbard. As you can see, I'm a big Rothbard fan. But it's a great book that goes into the origins of money and why it has value, why it is functioning the way it is, and why it is useful. And Rothbard was a big supporter of the gold standard, so it was a gold bar, because gold bar is a good libertarian currency. And I actually did that. I did a I did a PDF search, and I replaced every time the word gold showed up, I replaced it with Bitcoin. The book still works. It works perfectly. The argumentation is flawless. So I actually think that Rothbard predicted pretty much Bitcoin, and then he would be the biggest fan of Bitcoin ever. And many professors of the Austrian school are big into Bitcoin, and of course they talk about it, and they use it as the prime example of how a free currency could function. So why are many libertarians in there? Because it's the perfect libertarian currency.
Yeah, I can see the enthusiasm on this topic. So clearly, many people share in the community the great Austrian school thoughts, and I am a big fan of the sort of the micro aspects and then the cyclical aspects of the theory. And I do believe that a lot of waste happens in the sort of the peak cycle, and because of the malinvestment incentives sort of getting fueled wrong, and then you need some cleansing after that. Then it would be better to sort of have the sort of the system running on the optimal investment all the time. So that's a great point. And what I really like about the Austrian school is the sort of micro end of it. So it's basically a free market and free exchange, and then trying to do the voluntary exchanges. And that's of course healthy, and not sort of bailing out anybody, and the sort of wasting resources, scarce resources. That's all good stuff, and they get the Nobels for that. And I agree with you. Rothbard is maybe the greatest of those guys, and not to sort of discredit the earlier greats. But what I now comes to I must go. I'm a post-Keynesian evil overlord. No, sorry. But I can see points in any economic system, and what I a little bit don't like in the sort of the school is the sort of you're trying to extrapolate the micro to macro, and then you go wrong because you can't extrapolate the sort of individual transactions to a mass system, and there you need to aggregate things, and when you aggregate things, then the sort of theories break down. And then the gold buck, I'm not a gold buck. I have owned ETF golds when it was going up, but then I sold them once they sort of peaked out. So I have never owned physical gold, and the sort of it's just a one commodity among others. And in a sense, to me, sad to say, Bitcoin is another commodity among others. And as such, I don't share the sort of the basic need to own it. It's just one asset class among the other asset classes. It has great features, but it's just an asset class. But I can see the appeal and the sort of the sort of rebelness, and then there's a little bit of a like that the sort of mainstream guys don't know about it or don't approve it, so it makes it sexy, definitely.
Yes, good points that you bring up, and I agree that in any theory there are good points and there are bad points, and you have to pick out the good ones and discard the bad ones, or understand them and then discard them. And for me, what really showed me that Keynesianism cannot really explain how Bitcoin works. It's for him, it's impossible, because he says, well, the government gives the value to money with legal tender laws. That's his stick. I mean, yes, it's more detailed, and we could go more into that. Yes, but Keynesian theory cannot explain why Bitcoin exists. It's, as far as I understand it, impossible for a Keynesian economist to explain why there's a Bitcoin. For the Austrian, it's not. And and then again, what does Bitcoin actually do? So with virtual and digital goods, like a PDF document, you have no cost of copying. So if Niko sends me a PDF document, he still has it, and I have it. So it's a non-scarce good. I can have it without taking it away from him, because you can copy it limitlessly with almost no costs. Now, this is great for sharing information. This is horrible for using a money system, because if you can just print as much money as you want, fiat, then it's going to be a bad currency. So what Bitcoin actually did, it brought scarcity into a non-scarce world, which is mind-blowing. If you understand what a non-scarce good is and what a scarce good is, to make this differentiation is incredible. And because in the Austrian theory, the scarcity of money and the attribute that you cannot and you do not inflate the money supply drastically is the main thing, or the main argument for the monetary theory in Austrian economics. Solid money, that sound money that does not inflate. And when Bitcoin then actually made something out of a infinitely inflatable good that is not inflatable, now that is interesting.
Great points, guys. Okay, great points again. And Sami, I agree with you as well that you might not need it, and people might not need it. Just like you said, you never owned physical gold. Me neither. I've never actually invested in anything else except cryptocurrencies, because I never saw the opportunity. I didn't see how can it benefit me and my life, and now I do see that. So it is a big ideological question as well. And like Max said earlier, Bitcoin is opt-in. Like it's not forced on anybody. It's fully voluntary protocol, and that's what makes it strong and amazing to me. And like if people don't really want to use it, that's what gives Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies the value. People want to use it, and scarcity is another very interesting point that Max brought in, because we are moving into the age of digital scarcity. We are moving into the age of digital collectibles, things that let's say people 50 years ago would put absolutely zero value, even 20 years ago. Even today, a lot of people won't put any value of, let's say, if you're talking about video games, in video game items have been sold for years and years, like World of Warcraft, stuff like that. A lot of people are out there who think it's absolutely waste of money, absolutely worthless. But does it make it so? No, it's just an opinion, and it's optional. And I think it's a very interesting point moving forward to keep in mind that there might actually, and there will most likely be, multiple different asset classes that we can use. and as many of those, if there can be voluntary, if there's all this legal tender thing can be of course challenged, but other than that, I think like voluntary systems are always great. So we talked about a little bit about microeconomics, macroeconomics, and Sami, you seem to think that there's no way to combine these two. Would you guys say that it's possible to do it using cryptocurrencies? If so, how and why? And I think it's Sami's turn to go first.
Yeah, so I think that's my model. I was explaining that you use take the blockchain technology angle, and then you replace the databases in the fiat system with the blockchains, and that's in the simplest form. You start with that. So you use the better, more energy efficient, and more sort of transaction cost efficient technology, and then you go by that. Then of course you need to solve this sort of regulatory and taxation problems as well, and alongside with that, and who can create this money, and that's of course a big thing. You can keep the right of creating new money on the commercial bank level, and they might use it responsible way, or they don't, and then you can create a systems which prevent them being irresponsible. Reserve requirements are not that system, but you could have other hard caps in creating deposits. So it's possible to save the fiat with the technology.
Interesting points you bring up. So the question is if we can combine micro and macroeconomic theory.
Okay. I missed the question actually then.
Oh, okay. Then please, if you want to answer.
Oh, sorry. I thought, can you combine the fiat system with the cryptocurrencies?
Okay. Sorry, Niko, what's the question? I'm sorry.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't being clear on that. So can microeconomics and macroeconomics be combined using cryptocurrencies? And if you think so, how? And if you don't think so, also why?
Yeah, disregard my answer then. I was answering the completely different question. Perhaps I start again. So whether the micro and macro economies can be combined, and that's like a combined unification theory. Like people are searching that on the sort of on the quarks and the gravity, and trying to find the unifying theory. So it's a bit similar thing. The micro and macro are different schools, and they shall never sort of merge is one school of thought. But you can aggregate micro transactions and create a sort of simulated model to do better macro analysis, and people are certainly doing that with the model, and some of which are neoclassical and Keynesian in nature, and you could incorporate the Austrian models in those as well. And I think that's one answer. So you sort of have a better computer power, so you can crunch more numbers on to aggregate microdata to macro level.
Yeah, so the difference between micro and macro is mainly, I do not know if it originates, but it is mainly part of the Keynesian theory, but also monetary theory and Chicago school. And I do not think that you can actually that easily aggregate individual choices. So in Austrian economy, there's it's the study of praxeology, the study of human action. And this basically means, why do humans act? Why do we do stuff? The answer that Austrian theory provides is that, well, it's valuable. And to whom is it valuable? Well, to you as an individual. So any action that the individual takes shows that this specific action gave him the most amount of value that he could get, exposed. So before actually taking the choice or making the choice, the individual has to decide, what am I going to do? And if he decides to do this one thing, then he always decides not to do the other thing, which means one thing is valued higher than the other. Now, but it is really, really important to understand what this valuation is, because it's not cardinal. It's not that you can add the valuation of an apple to the valuation of a banana, because they're two fundamental different things. And I cannot compare my individual valuation to Niko's individual valuation. We are completely different, and we cannot compare those whatsoever. And there's also no value or no number in the valuation. So we cannot say I get 5 utils out of this. I mean, this is something that Keynes do in some mathematical equations, but in Austrian theory, it's like, no, you cannot add or subtract or multiply valuation. It's something that only shows what do you value more, not by how much or by how little, but by a specific amount of measurement. But in general, do you value it more or less? And then again, on the individual level, this works perfectly fine. But if you then would zoom out on the macro scale and aggregate all those individual valuations, it's a contradiction, because you cannot aggregate valuation. And therefore, you, in my opinion, you cannot aggregate a market. So to this divide between micro and macro, although it is understandable, I don't think it is that useful. And now, but then, okay, so this is the one point. How can cryptocurrencies be used to combine micro and macro? The interesting thing is now we actually have macro data, and like really good data, because we have the blockchain. We see every transaction in the system, and we can do amazing economic calculation with that. In real time, every 10 minutes, we get an update on what the economy is doing. I mean, this, you know, if you would believe in the Fisher monetary formula, I only know the name in German, Fisher's Verkehrsgleichung, where you have the velocity of money in it. So the amount that one unit of money is spent and handed over to another individual. You can do that in Bitcoin like perfectly. So doing that kind of calculation on the macro scale is much, much more easy in Bitcoin than in Euro. At least, you know, from what I would say. And because, you know, in Euro, it's a bit of a voodoo science, because you do not have those exact numbers. You only have rough estimates and guesses.
Really good points again, guys. And I'm sorry I try to hurry along with this, because we still have a lot of things that I want to cover here. A quick remark, yeah. On the incentives of individuals, like what incentivizes the use of money and saving and stuff like that. I think that's a really key point here to think, like how would we incentivize people and what drives the economy. So I think we should probably consider that right now. What do you guys think? Is deflation better than inflation, and what drives the economy? There's kind of like, I would say, dualism between these two options. Max, would you like to go first?
Oh, I just finished. Sami, please go ahead.
Okay, Sami, go first.
Yeah. So I guess the sort of the pet peeve of the Austrians is that and the monetarists, like good old Friedman, is that the monetary inflation is different from the sort of the measured consumer price inflation, and that's true. I mean, that sort of you have a monetary inflation running on the background, and then you have the sort of the prices doing other thing. And of course, you have to ask what inflation you measure. Like if you look at just on the sort of the price of your daily goods, that's been a kind of deflationary or lowish inflation, like 1% ish, because Asian markets producing much efficiently a lot of stuff we used to pay a lot of money previously, like your mobile phones are much cheaper and computers are cheaper, and your Spotify costs nothing to whilst previously you paid for music. So you have a inherent deflationary tendencies coming from technology all the time. But why is this inflation going up? And I mean, you have the asset bubbles building on the background, and that can be, of course, bad. Like you have like inflation on the asset side of things, and so I think I would argue the first kind of deflation is good, like you get more services and goods because the technology brings them to the better way in the global value chain. And then you have a kind of useless inflation, which is the sort of asset bubbles, and you should try to get rid of that. Now, if everything would be deflationary, I think that would be a horrible place, because nobody would borrow, everybody would hoard stuff. Everybody would be rational to wait for everything to get cheap, and nobody would want to borrow anything because you know your debt burden will be higher tomorrow. So I think that's kind of evil place in my opinion. So at least a neutral place would be good. I think deflationary harsh word is a quite harsh place.
Really, really good points that you bring up. And it's really important, the point that you brought up, the difference between the monetary inflation and the inflation in the purchasing power of money. This is so, so, so important, and it is completely ignored by most people. For most of history, inflation was the increase in the monetary supply. That was inflation. And then the loss in purchasing power, that is after supply and demand, in the natural result after an increase in the monetary supply, you increase the supply of money, which means the price of money, the purchasing power of money will drop. Now, what Keynes did in his work is that he switched up those two terms basically, and he ignored the inflation in the monetary base, and he just said, well, we have to make sure that the inflation in the purchasing power of money needs to be checked. The inflation in the monetary base, that doesn't matter, but the inflation in the purchasing power, that's where we have to apply our economic control and management. So really important to divide those two. Now, let's make a hypothetical example. We are small economy, Niko, Sami, and I, and Sami has 50 I don't know, coins. Niko has 30 coins, and I have 20 coins. So in total, there are 100 coins.
Sorry, guys.
Well, you're the older and more experienced investment banker.
But I don't have 51%, so I can't screw you guys. So no.
But okay, so this is no equity stock. This is money. Okay, so no ownership in a company, but just money. So the monetary base is 100, and now let's inflate the monetary base to 200, and we give each of us double the money. So Sami has 100, Niko has 60, and I have 40. Right? Now, are we wealthier? Well, no, not really. In this micro ecosystem, no. Sami had 50% of the assets before, and he had 50% after. And the same with Niko and me. So the interesting thing is, inflation, monetary inflation, does not create wealth. So when saying that inflation stimulates the economy, well, it might do in the secondary effect, but primary, no. Money is neutral. However, what would happen if the following occurs? We are back again in our hypothetical ecosystem. Sami 50, Niko 30, Max 20. Now again, we have 100 additional coins that come into the ecosystem. But now it's not spread fairly and equally between all three of us. But for example, Sami, because he's the investment banker, he gets all the new 100 coins. So what happens? Now the inflation in the monetary supply was lopsided to only one actor, Sami. So now he has increased his monetary base to 75%. And Niko has done 18, and I have, I'm calculating right, I think so, 7. Doesn't matter. So right now, if we have this inflation lopsided, then we have an increase in wealth, not in the entire economy on the macro scale, but for the individual.
Yeah,
Sami is much better off. Niko and me are much worse off. So when you introduce inflation not equally distributed throughout all of them, you actually create a bunch of, you prefer a couple people and you disadvantage others. And now again, how does money, and then, okay, once Sami has those 100 new coins, he can do stuff with them. He can go to Niko and buy a consulting hour, for example. And then for Sami, he has, the new money. Niko still doesn't even know about the new money. But now he gets a part of those new monies. And this means that Niko starts to benefit from the newly inflated money supply earlier than I do. Because as soon as I get one transaction from Sami, the purchasing power of that money has already dropped because Niko now has some of that new money as well. So when introducing new money into the monetary base in a centralized way, not equally distributed, the people that get that money first And the people that are the beneficiaries of the first of those transactions of those initial people, they get the benefit. And the people that get the money the last, they actually get a negative benefit. So increasing the monetary supply for only one party or a few parties gives them a lot of money and gives them a lot of purchasing power and steals a lot of purchasing power from the people that are at the bottom of that chain.
Yeah, great point. I mean, front running the system is bad. I mean, or it's good if you're front running it, but it's bad if you're second running it.
Very interesting points about what drives the economy, and to that I'll just cherry pick quickly this last question, that a last point that Julius made in the chat. He said that everybody knows that an iPhone X cost half the amount in 2 years, and yet people still buy it. I think that's a very good point. People don't just simply stop existing because the money is deflationary. I think Max is a good example of a person who uses a deflationary asset as well. And for me, personally, I would like to paint you a picture of like how Bitcoin, for example, changed my life. Like I used to spend a lot of money because that's how the money, well, that's how fiat money is. It's made to be spent according to the theory that it drives economy and creates jobs and whatnot. But what I think now is, do I value this thing that I'm about to purchase with my money? Do I value it more than I value my freedom? So that's the kind of the thing that it forces you to think. And to me, it seems like it would logically lead to a more efficient world, that only good products can survive through free market because people won't buy shit anymore. Right now, there's this like consumerism, culture of consumerism and disposable things that people buy because it's cheap and it's convenient. And I think that's maybe the wrong kind of an economy that it can drive. Just my 2 cents. Do you guys have any comments on that before we move on to the last topic?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the good point about deflationary world is that you certainly make more responsible consumption choices because you have lots of scarce shit which gets scarcer in the future. So you only want the quality, which will be better than that. So I can see your point on that. And if you have an inflationary sort of trash money, then you want to throw it around.
Yeah, really good points that you bring up, Niko. And that is, it's not just you that had this mind shift, but many people did, because we live in a inflationary fiat money for over 100 years. Okay, and what happens with inflationary money is that, as I explained earlier, if you spend the money last, you lose money, like you lose purchasing power. This means you are incentivized to have a short-term time preference, a low time preference. This means that you want to have consumption and that you want to have the satisfaction and the fulfillment of consumption rather sooner than later. This is always the case. We all have a time preference. We all value stuff now more than later, because later, it's later. We would rather have stuff now. It's nature. It's humanity. It's logical. And now, if you have the inflated fiat system, you have a really, really short time preference and low-term time preference, which means that you spend a lot and you do not invest for the futures. You do not invest for bad times. You do not save, and you waste money because, well, anything is better to have than worthless paper. No, we see, and you see that especially during hyperinflations. In hyperinflations, like, I mean, there's countless fiat money hyperinflations. For example, Germany in Weimar, the Weimar Republic, they, over a couple of nights, and you got paid twice a day because you needed to buy your breakfast before work, and you needed to buy lunch or dinner after work. And with the money that you earned for your breakfast, you could no longer afford lunch in the evening. This is how short-term time preference works out. It's horrific. It's horrible. Now, what is on the other hand? If you have a money that does not inflate, that has a steady supply and is unchangeable and limited, and if demand for this good goes up, price will go up. And if you use such a currency, this means that you have a long time preference. Because yes, you could use your money today to consume a coffee, or you could use the same money in a year from now to consume a Lamborghini. Now, if it's Bitcoin, maybe that amount of price increase is possible.
Right.
So and the question is, if we have such a drastically deflationary currency in the purchasing power, which means that the purchasing power increases over time, is this going to hinder consumption? So if you had a lot of money and you knew that you had a lot of money tomorrow, and it's going to be more money, would you not eat? Well, of course you would eat. You have to consume. You have to consume at least a little bit. And there are opportunity costs as well. So even if you don't consume, you could do something else with that money.
So you would, perhaps one point I agree with you, but you wouldn't lend, or you would only lend with negative interest rate. And that screws the system. Young people can't borrow from their rich themselves. And that's, I guess, is the one good benefit of inflation, is that the young people can safely borrow from their rich future selves using the fiat debt, because they know it's going to be less valuable in the future. If you know your debt is going to be more valuable in the future, you're robbing your future self in quite a heavy-handed way, and that will make people not invest in the education, for example.
I would like to challenge that slightly, if I may.
Oh, okay.
Talk about lends. Like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the project called ETHLend, for example, or SALT. At least ETHLend is full-on crypto loans. So I'm a heavy user of that service, and this is an unpaid commercial for them. But the point is, I do think that it is possible for young people, or any unbanked people, for example, because it's a decentralized platform for loans. So what you can do is you can put your investment as a collateral, and you can collateralize your, let's say, not Bitcoin, but let's say Bitcoin, and then secure a loan of another token and then reinvest. So if you do it smartly, it is possible to actually game it that way, that you will leverage your position rather than lose money on those loans, even though the asset that you are loaning actually is deflatory. So that's something to consider and look in. Look up.
And what I would also add to that is that I'm totally comfortable with giving a loan in Bitcoin. I'm totally comfortable with giving a loan in any currency. I'm not comfortable with having such a volatile asset with the purchasing power being volatile, such as Bitcoin, as a unit of account. I do not want to have that. So there's a difference between me giving Niko a Bitcoin and saying, give me that Bitcoin back tomorrow, plus 5% in Bitcoin interest. That's a big difference to say, I give you now 1,000 euros worth of Bitcoin, and in 1 year you give me 1,000 plus 1,000 euros worth plus 5% of Bitcoin. So using a volatile unit of account is always tricky and always less favorable, and using a more stable or a good that has a rather stable purchasing power is a better unit of account.
Yeah, and one solution is I checked there's a cryptocurrency called Tether, which basically is just a fiat-backed sort of tracker of using the Bitcoin technology, and that could be one solution. So you get the same price as a fiat, but with the Bitcoin technology. So maybe that's the way to go.
Agreed. Yes, but is a fiat currency really a stable unit of account? Is the purchasing power of fiat really that stable? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And I mean, what is a really stable unit of account? There is no such thing as a stable valuation. It's impossible. So there will always be fluctuations in the unit of account. Yes, but those have to be minimal. Gold has been a really, really good unit of account for like thousands of years. There's a story that you could get the same or rather same suit, tailor-made bespoke suit in London, always for one gold coin. Like one fancy suit, you could always get it for like this one like specific amount of gold throughout like a couple hundred years. It was a study that I saw, which just shows gold keeps its purchasing power quite good.
Great. Let's start to wrap it up here. Before that, I'll offer you one more anecdote, because that was I thought it was what was it that you said? I have to check back. Oh wait, yeah. Let's go through the taxation one more time. Sorry, I was almost about to wrap up. We had one more important question. Can taxation and redistribution survive the cryptocurrency revolution. So this is, I believe this is Sami's question that you put in here. And what you probably mean with this is like, is there going to be taxable events in the future using cryptocurrencies? And if some transactions and contracts are taxed, and while most are not, when you can't actually do that with a lot of cryptocurrencies, will nation states fail? And if so, what will replace them? So I think this is a nice question to wrap up with, and then we'll go to the audience questions. And I'll save that anecdote for the end as well.
Yeah, it's obviously a very loaded question, so I don't want to lose Finland for Bitcoin libertarians. So I want to save at least some of the taxation. And if you lose that, the friendly, inclusive states like Finland, what's the alternative? I mean, you have to take that seriously. Those places can be pretty evil. We have a Russia next to us. I don't want to be a Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get your point, and I agree. This is going to be a huge challenge for nation states and for the taxation offices. It's kind of incredible, because what we have right now with the censorable fiat banking accounts is that, well, first of all, your income tax gets deducted out of your paycheck directly, so you don't even have a choice if you want to. Like, you cannot even deny that. It's deducted automatically for you. And then later, it's a censorable account. So even if you do not want to pay the taxes, they can easily be taken from you. So taxation is, as I said, an involuntary payment. In a fiat system, this involuntarity, is there a noun for that? The involuntarity
sounds right.
is under the carpet. It does sound right. So yeah, it is. You don't really feel that. You just get a specific amount of money. Yes. Oh yeah. Right. Okay. That's a good one. Thank you. Yeah. With Bitcoin, the taxman can no longer steal your money without your consent. They have to ask for permission, and you can at any time deny it. Yes, they can come after you, but they can never, ever, under whatsoever circumstances, steal your money. And
sad.
You know. But it's the same with cash, and it's the same with a gold coin. It's the same with where you hold the physical property of, or physical ownership. You have to give permission to exchange that property. And taxation has worked before that. And taxation will work now with Bitcoin as well. Yes. But it will not be on such a colossal scale as we have it this right now. Because I mean, in Germany we have, it's hard to calculate, but like a 60 to 80% tax on the everything. Are people really willingly going to pay that if they see how much it is? If they have to physically hand the money over? Well, I think the possibility of a riot is much, or of let's say civil disobedience, gets much more increased if the individual personally has to hand over the stolen money.
So will nation states fail, in your opinion?
They will struggle, but they will not fail without a fight. And it's going to be a big fight.
Okay, that's fair. Sami, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think your friendly regulator will come to the blockchain near you, so that that system. Sorry to say that, but I take your point. You have to sort of physically make your tax reports, and the government has to be much more open, and that's a good thing. And in a way they use the money, that will create efficiency. So at least we get that. But I'm older than you guys, so I want somebody to pay my pension. So be careful with your libertarian movements.
All right, that's fair. Okay, do you guys have anything else to add before we start taking those questions? We have a lot here. I'm probably gonna not take all of the questions, but maybe the best ones. Can you guys see the chat, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, so did you guys have anything else to add to the previous topics? Should we move on?
Well, I think the entire regulation issue is a really, really interesting topic, and I think that's another 3-hour discussion that we hopefully have in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have to say for myself that I do like the way things are going. Like opt-in taxes sounds great. Another question is, will that make nation states fail or not? Which was the original question. But I do think like in a Finnish newspaper, I think there was this clickbait of a headline that by worst, they used the word worse. By worst, Bitcoin could mean a return to the 80s, and the reference was a cash-based society where the taxes would be basically largely opt-in, so to speak, because you would have to actually declare yourself those taxes. And I think we are moving to that direction, and I just disagree almost 100% that it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. Everything voluntary is wonderful. Another question is, what kind of a friction is it going to cost, and is it going to make the nation states fail, and what kind of bad things come out of that? And that's another concern. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sami.
and it would of course still be a crime not to disclose fully. So I think that will keep most people honest.
Yes. I think so too. I think most people will want to pay taxes as long as there's a way to do that. It makes sense and it's not too much. I think a lot of people are going to, and I don't think necessarily nation states are going to fail in the capacity that the most apocalyptic scenes. Let's flash that one picture again. Are the reality. So yeah, I'm not that pessimistic. All right. Oh yeah, the anecdote. So about the
one thing that I would add, or so okay, is that what we have now is a way to prove how funds are being sent, and this is really interesting for governments, because what are governments other than the representation of the people? And governments work for the people. And your boss should check how you're doing. And if your boss, the people, can check all the transactions that you make, I actually think that this will help defraud many of the government activities and clean a lot of stuff up.
Yeah.
Now the question is, will the governments actually use it? I don't think so. I don't think that the government will publish all their transactions on a blockchain soon.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would like to add to that voting. Like, people don't realize that it's already possible to take voting to the blockchain and make it so that nobody can tamper the results. The problem, however, is that no government wants to do that, which is curious enough to me. And what a surprise, right? So it's almost as if the governments don't want a transparent election. Just my thoughts. Anyway, before we move to... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. I think but then you can flip that the people should be able to fully monitor the government, and they should be able to verify the voting. But then you don't necessarily want the government to be fully able to monitor everything you do and publish it.
Yes,
so that might be a bit
right.
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree fully. So
100%.
One more anecdote, and then we move on to the questions. So, Max, you were talking about unit of account earlier, and what would be appropriate for a deflation once, let's say that we hit this target where fiat money is no longer used, and there's like deflationary reserve currency. So, what to use as a unit of account? And just today, I think I read a tweet. I forgot who it's from. I can put a link in the description. But I think it was like Lambos might actually be the perfect unit of account, because that's pretty much like it tells you something about the value. Like, think about this like classic supercar from the 80s. I think it's a good representation of what your money can buy, and I would suspect one Bitcoin buys more Lambos than gold in the future. But that's just my thought. Anyway, that's just to lighten up the end here. Okay, let's go to the questions. So Julius here has really shown some dedication in the questions, so I think we should take some of his.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. That's awesome. There's so many questions. Did you guys find a favorite? Why don't you guys both pick one question and we'll go through those?
I must confess, I'm useless when I open the YouTube, then I lose the audio feed here. So.
Oh, okay, no worries. I'll just put the questions here on the. Hold on.
It's in our notes as well.
Can I send the
6 questions from Julius?
Oh yeah, right. I already sent that through the chat, so you can check from there.
Okay. Yeah.
But Max,
okay, those six.
why don't you go first? Pick
Yes.
a question. Let's go through it.
So actually, that was the question that I read even before the talk, because I think that was a nice introduction. So it's the first question. Socialism is a system where government or the community controls the means of production. Really, really good. Means of production. This system has failed miserably in history and ended in the deaths of millions. And actually, Google government regicide is Death by Government. 2 good books on that. Many hundreds of millions of people were killed by the government in peaceful and not in war, but just killing civilians. Anyhow, why is a control over production of money necessary for market economy? And will it not fail? And will it not fail the way central planning failed in other means of production? That is really interesting. So is central planning and is manipulation of money necessary in the economy? And does this actually do something good? And of course, I argue on the Austrian side and on the libertarian side to say, no, we want to have neutrality in money. We do not want to have a changeable and unpredictable and centrally planned money, but we want to have a predictable and a controllable and a decentralized or managed in a decentralized fashion. That's how or at least in my opinion, the money should be. Now, what is also interesting in the fiat central bank system, they rely necessarily on a monopoly. There can only be one legal tender fiat currency in a fiat currency system. And what we have in crypto is the complete opposite, because there is definitely no legal tender laws. There is definitely no monopoly. It is the pure free market and it is pure competition. You can, within 5 minutes, create your own Bitcoin clone or fork or airdrop or whatever. It's easy. You just have to provide a good service. And only those currencies that provide a good service will survive in such a free and competition heavy market, which means, of course, for the end user, for the user of the money, this is perfect because you can get the best product. And this type of innovation and advancement, you do not have in a centralized system and in a closed system. You only have that in an open and in a competitive and in a cooperative fashion.
I would maybe pick the question 6 with the gist of it is that once you sort of get rid of the fiat money and you switch to sort of the hard monies, whether they are Bitcoins or collection of real assets or some other sort of the non-easily copyable form of borrowing with or safe borrowing with, where you kind of know that the real burden of paying that debt later on it will not be that hard because your friendly central bank will inflate it away, or you find some other way to sort of get rid of the real burden. Now the governments then get less tax receipts with this hard money because it's harder to collect because people have to sort of see the justification of that. That's a kind of good thing. It will force the governments to sort of act responsibly with their scarce resources. Now, the second part of the question is that will the other parties act responsibly? That if you have a labor union setting the wages, will they voluntarily accept deflationary reductions in those payments? Of course they won't. They will fight, and that will create a lot of disruption. And you have to sort of tear down the system to where the sort of individuals are responsible for their own contracts. And that's hard because people are sort of not currently capable of running in the free economy. They need somebody bigger to sort of steer them. And that definitely will be a very big challenge. I mean, you need to tear down not only the government in this world, but you also need to tear down most of the collective systems in it, labor unions and the like. And that's not necessarily easy. You could go to this Mad Max world while you do that. At least create some suffering.
Yeah, a quick add-on to the question about the sticky wages. I don't think that wages are that sticky. You are in negotiations all the time, and each party wants to have the best outcome, and that is both the employer and the employee. And if let's say we are in a deflationary, or let's say the purchasing power of money rises drastically in this economy, then this is known by all the parties, and this will be considered in the signing of the contract and the agreement on the contract.
Mm-hmm.
So same with now a inflationary money purchasing power in the current fiat system. We still get an agreement on how to figure out how to keep the netto income rather stable, and you can do that in contracts as well. So voluntary contracts, you can do pretty much whatever, and hedging is possible in that scenario.
Yep. Let's hope we have that kind of wisdom on people. Currently, we have these collective systems. And then point 5 is about the austerity measures. Then, all this deflationary world is making the world awfully hard for the sort of people who are living off the economic value of the other parties, and that's of course kind of sad, but it's effective as well. And in the best way, this economy will be more efficient, and because people will value their resources, and everything will be scarce in the true sense of the world. And but once we get there, things are going to get ugly. People will kick and scream and fight the system, and then that will be, at least that generation which makes the adjustment will suffer. I think maybe in the end the world will be better, but there's for sure will be lots of suffering.
Oh, thanks for the answers. Do you guys still want to keep going through the 2 questions, or should we wrap it up?
One more question that I would like to answer is question number 7. But Niko, if you want to answer a question yourself, please go.
No, I was actually going to take number 7, so we might as well do that now.
Okay. Well, then you please go ahead, answer number 7, and then maybe I have to add some.
All right. So I was interested in this question. Do you think that the central planners have adequate means to actually know the desired quantity of money in the economy? If so, why have central banks failed to meet inflation targets? And this is something like, I'm not an economic professional by any stretch. So for me, this is an interesting question. I haven't really thought about that, and I was just curious of. I would like to hear the response, especially from Sami, who is the expert, and also Max. So I'll leave the dissection for you guys. Go ahead.
Yeah. Like Max said, the sort of fiat system has a lag, so you do collect all the statistics, but they are monthly, and that makes even if they're monthly, they are already also the central banks have created ways to predict the future, which is the sort of the inflation swaps. So all the central banks follow the sort of implied inflation in the swap market, and they use that as a tool to predict the inflation in the market. And but that's also a crude tool. I think the sort of you have to take guesses, and you go wrong. And then if you have a hawks running the system, then you create deflation, and then you have the usual kind of doves. Then they sort of overrun the inflation.
This question is really difficult to answer in money. So let's first try to answer it for normal goods. And what I would argue is that in order to know where to allocate resources, so whether we should use this ton of steel to build a new skyscraper or to build a bridge, it is pretty much impossible to know what to do unless you have a profit system. So if you have private property and free exchange, then profits arise because prices arise. And you only make a profit if you predict the future correctly in the future demand of your customers. Because you have to calculate how much cost you can carry, how much cost you can pick up in order to still be profitable in the future when your clients actually have or purchase your product. And without such a pricing mechanism, and again, you only have such a pricing mechanism in free exchange and private property, okay? Without such a pricing system, you simply cannot know where the most precious allocation of the resources is. And this means that it is impossible for a central planner to oversee and to allocate all the resources perfectly in a economy, in a centrally planned economy. And now, how is it with money? Again, same thing. I do not think that one person or one group of persons or just one actor has the power or the skills to, number one, get all the information that is necessary on the market, and then allocate all the resources to the most needed areas. And that is the same in normal goods and the same in money. So I do not think that the central bank has a clue what the correct amount of money is in the ecosystem and what the correct interest rate is and stuff like that. It's impossible for them to know. How could they? They're guessing in the dark. Now, what they are trying to do, and as Sami pointed out with those swap markets, is to pretend that there is a free market and then use this pretended free market to hypothetically somehow figure out what the free and the correct price would be in such a free market. Well, I'm sorry, but there is no free market. There are no prices. There are no profits. It is impossible to allocate those resources perfectly. And this is I don't know if I did a good job explaining that, because it is a really, really difficult problem. A good book on that subject is by Ludwig von Mises called Socialism or Nationalökonomie in German. It explains exactly this calculation problem and why the state, by definition, cannot be as efficient and as resource efficient and productive as the free market. So Mises, Socialism, great book. Damn difficult though.
Thanks, Max. Sami, do you have anything more to add before we wrap it up?
I think you think great there. I mean, it's basically the pricing mechanism has been sort of killed by this sort of the artificial rates, and then that makes the commercial players life harder because you have to sort of guess on things unnecessarily.
Mm.
You can, of course, little bit hedge against that by not sort of just investing in the sort of hard type of assets and projects and shares, and those take away some of the sort of risk coming from the sort of misallocation of interest and the sort of money supply.
Yeah, I think a free market hasn't really existed in scale ever before, and I wonder if we're going to, at some point, it certainly seems like we might be able to reach this kind of free market situation. But how long will it take? And the obstacles on the road is I guess, what all of us here try to smoothen. Like there will be an enormous amount of friction moving from one system to another. And as we discussed today, there's no easy answers to anything. So, but I certainly learned a lot from you guys, and I thank you guys both for taking the time and coming to this show. It's been great and really interesting points, and I'm definitely gonna watch this soon again and probably put some timestamps in. And also, I was thinking it would be a good idea to gather all the links we talked about and make a list as well for the viewers who come afterwards and want to check out your stuff. And to that end, would you guys, before we wrap it up, tell the viewers where to find you guys, where to find your work, how to get in contact, and all that good stuff. Max, why don't you go first?
Yes, so I'm not big into social media. I do use Twitter mainly for Bitcoin news because it's the best place to get Bitcoin news. So if you want to reach out on Twitter at Hillebrand Max, and just shoot me a Telegram at Max Hillebrand, I think, or Max_Hillebrand, or just an email. Which one should I use? I have so many email addresses, I never know which one to use. It's horrible. Let's use max@nx.solar, or any other email. Yeah, just reach out. You can find me. My website is at towardsliberty.com. Still in production, but it will get there, hopefully. So there's a bunch of resources and a bunch of useful links and other stuff that I do. Check it out.
Thanks, Max. You go ahead, Sami.
Yeah, and I also use Twitter, but it's get a bad rap with Mr. Trump sort of going through. So, but my handle there is Sami.Miettinen. So like you can see on the screen. So, and I respond also to messages there, and that's maybe the easiest way to do it. Most of my blogging is in Finnish, but if you look under my name, I have written blogs about the monetary system in especially in the euro. And then the sort of this hard scientific group I'm part of is Euro Think Tank.fi. and there we have published a number of papers sort of suggesting reforms to the euro system. And it's I'm just a master of science, but all the other 11 guys are mostly PhDs, so there's a wealth of opinion there. We have, for example, published white papers on how to dismantle the common currency and such things.
Great, good stuff, guys. And yeah, I would like to ask.
Niko, you're muted.
Sorry, what was that? Oh, I'm muted. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was muted on the Zoom side. I was live with the other because I have to press 2 different buttons to actually speak. So I messed it up there. Sorry again. Yeah,
all good.
You know, thanks guys for everything. And if you guys are up to it, I will be happy to do another panel with you guys, or we can do more educational videos, whatever. Take some questions. I think at least we had the most viewers so far in the show. So that's good. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope you found my anecdotes funny or funny in a sad way, at least. And yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So any closing remarks?
Thanks, guys. It's been fantastic. I think we kind of share the same ideology, but I'm coming from a different angle, and it's been certainly I've learned myself also a lot, and we'll certainly keep on the conversation offline, and then let's do this again.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely, Sami. It's been a pleasure doing this with you. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself greatly, and you're a really smart guy, and you do have a lot of knowledge. So we definitely have to do it again. I would love to pick your brain a bit more, especially on the regulation in crypto. I think that's something that we could talk for hours. And I'm writing a paper on that,
Yeah,
so we should talk for hours.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Source paper.
Yep.
Of course.
Oh yeah, Max, aren't you writing an open source project for your studies?
Oh yes, so I do write a paper, and it is open source because all my work that I do is open source. And the title of the paper, the working title of the paper, is why we neither need nor want government regulation in cryptocurrency, a case for anarchy in Bitcoin, or a case for anarchy in money, which is basically no forceful regulation in cryptocurrency.